Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to this nice conference, and I'm a little bit nervous to speak after Michael's nice talk, so I hope it will be not so much different. So my presentation is about the application of the zero-valent iron nanoparticles for treatment of polluted groundwater or polluted waters. The talk was prepared by me from Technical University of Liberec, and my colleague Petr Kvapil from Aquatest Environmental Consultancy, and Professor Radek Zbořil from Palacký University of Olomouc. So this conference is mainly about the possible negative effects of nanotechnologies and nanomaterials for living cells, for humans, for environment. And my talk will be a little bit opposite. I would like to show you that nanotechnologies and nanoparticles especially can be used for the improvement of our environment, for treatment of polluted water, industrial wastewater, drinking water, or wastewater and contaminated groundwater. Short overview of the task. We have many sites, not only in the Czech Republic, but all around the world, which are polluted by former industrial activities, where we had some release of waste from some industrial site to the unsaturated zone, and then the contamination moved to the saturated zone, goes to the cracks, and goes to the some environment which can be fractured, and it's very difficult to treat, to clean such a complicated system. One of the possibilities is to use the iron particles, nanoparticles, which has the size about 80 nanometers. They have the surface area exceeding 20 meters square per gram, and you can find in literature that they works with many of potential contaminants like chromium-6, arsenic, uranium, nitrate sulfates, chlorinated ethenes, which are the most spreaded pollutants, PCBs, linden, for example. Why we use the nanotechnology and not the micro scale iron, which can be used for such reaction as well? The important feature of the nano iron is the migration. These particles, which are on the picture down, can be transported with water, with groundwater, and they can migrate from the application point to the point of contamination, which I show later. So, in general, the reaction is simple. We take the iron, like we have the microscale iron. It reacts with oxygen and moisture and get rusty, get oxidized, and so it's, in general, it's donor of electrons, and we have some electron acceptors, which can be oxygen, or in our case, it can be some contaminants like chromium-6. Chromium-6 is chemically reduced to chromium-3, which precipitates, and water is clean. The iron nanoparticles are so reactive, like see on the picture, that they, of course, they react with the oxygen in fire. And our task is to use these particles to somehow to change them to be able to treat the contaminants like the chlorinated hydrocarbons here. The trichloroethylene is changed by the reaction with iron to ethene, which is, of course, not danger, not so toxic like the original chlorinated hydrocarbons. We have here some small example from laboratory. We had the water from Macedonia, from some chemical complex where the groundwater around is very polluted by really a huge mixture of chemicals, from linden to chloroform to chlorobenzenes, ethenes, ethanes, and so on. And we treated such water in laboratory for 72 hours with 1.5 grams of nano iron, and you see changes in the concentration so that we are able to reduce the contaminants below the detection limit in most cases. So this is, let's say, simple example how this nano iron works in laboratory. but for the application in the field, we need to have a nano iron with very different properties. We need particles with high reactivity with contaminants. Of course, this is the basic things we want to treat the contaminants. The second property is the mobility. I said we would like to have particles which migrates, which move from one side to the other and go to the contaminants. Then the next point is the stability. We need the particles which can survive some transport, some preparation phase from the production to the application. Of course, we need also the particles which has a minimum or no negative effect for the environment, and the particles which are available and they are also not so costly. All these things goes against each other. If the particles are reactive, they don't migrate and they are not stable, of course, and if they are very stable, they don't react with the contaminants. So the idea how to protect the surface of the particles is some surface modification, and there are some examples what we try, or people, you can find in the literature, people tried for the surface modification of the particles to protect them from fast oxidation. Now we can say that there are already 4 generations of the zero-valent iron nanoparticles. The first generation was prepared in laboratory by wet chemical reaction with borohydride. This is according to Professor Zhang of the Lehigh University, USA. Then the second generation was where particles produced in furnace by reduction with hydrogen, and then stabilized with the surface stabilizers I showed before. Then my colleagues from Palacký University came with the idea to protect the surface of the particles by very thin oxidic layer of the iron and stabilize them later before the application. And nowadays we work on the combined particles which combine the effect of iron reduction and carbon sorption on carbon, so that there are particles which are combined. On the picture down you see the TEM picture of nano iron particles. Here is an example where we try to use the iron oxides from former mines for the production of such particles. The surface passivation by the oxidic shell can be done by different conditions, and I have here example of 3 different conditions. Oxidation at room temperature 130 and 165 degrees, and you have the pictures how the particle looks. They are not different. On the left side you have the Röntgen spectra of contents of the iron and iron oxide, and you see that the peak of the iron is the highest in all cases, so that the most of the material is still zero-valent iron. And on the picture right you have the thickness of the shell, so that if we increase the temperature, the thickness of the shell increase, so the protection of the particles is higher, and we need to find the condition where the thickness of the shell is sufficiently enough to protect the particles, but on the other hand to not decrease their reactivity. Here is only a picture showing the iron together with carbon, where we have the small iron particles on the carbon structure, and the advantage of the material is that it can be separated from solution by magnetic separation, because the iron goes to magnetite. So I said that the reactivity of the particles is one thing. The other important parameter is the mobility, and I have here some pictures how the particle migrates through the laboratory column, and here is the comparison of the non-modified iron and 2 different surface modification, and you'll see that by the modification we are able to improve the mobility of the particles significantly, which is the most rightmost picture. The other parameters is the storativity. We need to have a particles which survive for some period of time, and here we have two examples: the particles without and with this oxidic layer. And this is DLS spectra showing that the mean particle diameter is more or less constant with the surface with this oxidic layer. And here is Röntgen spectra showing that the fresh and the particle after 63 days, the spectrum is not different, so the particles are almost the same when they are stored on air. But my talk is about the application mainly, so that we started in 2004, where we did the first application outside of the United States, and we did it some very old-fashioned laboratory experiments in the time, and then we did some simple application of the particles which we got from the Golder associate and particles according to Professor Zhang's recipe. And we saw that we are able to reduce the concentration of chlorinated ethenes for at least 6 months. And it was sort of beginning of our activity, and then we started to apply the technique and improve the particles, and till now we have about 15 laboratory studies with different water samples from different locations with different type of contaminants. We have over 10 pilot tests where we apply the particles on one or more application wells, and now we have even 3 full-scale application. And this is my next part of the talk, to show you case study of one of the full-scale application. This is the site called Písečná in the Czech Republic, which is former industrial waste disposal site, contaminated by chlorinated ethenes and ethanes. The area of contamination is not so high, it's about 2,000 meters square, but the contamination is in the depth below 20 meters, and then in the vicinity is a source of drinking water, so that there is no possibility to use some aggressive method like chemical oxidation, for example. We apply nanoparticles in amount of about 1 ton in 3 stages to 30 wells, and I show you the results. Oh, this one. Now first how we do the application. Now we came with the powder particles. Then we do the dispersion on site, where we add some surface stabilizers to improve the particle migration, particle mobility, and then we apply to some 1 or 2%, 2 grams per liter solution to the application well, and we do the monitoring. And the monitoring is shown as example here. This is the concentration of chlorinated ethanes. The blue ones is before the application, and the red ones, which you almost don't see, is 3 months after the application. So that there is really huge difference in concentration of these contaminants. If you look at the areal changes, this is the initial situation, and this is the situation after the third injection. It's not totally clean because there is so-called rebound effect because the contaminants are in pores and in some low permeable parts of the soil, and then it gets back to the water, so that it needs more than 1 re-injection to clean it totally. The last few overheads I have about the potential damage effects of these particles, because of course it's some new material for the living organisms in the soil, so we also study their possible negative effect to microorganisms which are in the soil, and we can say that they are adsorbed on the cell membranes, and they do the membrane disruption, and they can generate the reactive oxygen species in the cell, which then can go to DNA damage and protein oxidation. This is due to interaction of the iron with peroxide, and it produces OH radicals, which are danger for, of course, for the cell. We did some study where we applied the iron for cyanobacteria, where of course the negative effect is sort of good because we want to destroy the cyanobacteria, and it shows picture left is the just after the application, where the nano iron is sort of captured by the bacteria, and this picture is after some time where the cells are totally destroyed, and you see the residue of the cells and the iron oxide outside, so that we are able to kill this cyanobacteria, which is good for surface water. If you look at the algae, there is no negative effect, no damage, so that for the bigger organisms, the effect of nano iron is not negative, so that it's good for the application in the field. So as a conclusion, I showed you some application of the nanomaterials for treatment, for cleaning of the environment. It's relatively fast and method which has no need for special installation, no byproducts or toxic products are generated. It needs only monitoring and 2 or 3 times re-injection to clean the site. Of course, there is still some development of particles to improve their mobility, and the problem is also cost, because the particles are relatively costly, so that it needs some good reason to apply them for the treatment of the site. And thank you for your attention, and because we are in Czech, I say in Czech, děkuji za pozornost.
Many thanks for this very interesting talk. Do we have any questions from the floor?
Particles are the nano particles, the iron is oxidized to iron 3 or iron 2, so the final product is mainly magnetite, and these magnetite particles are sort of colloids, which are like normal colloids which are in the soil, so that we only increase the number of the natural colloids there. And of course, these particles has a tendency to conglomerate, so that finally we have some magnetite which is in some conglomerated form. Yeah, welcome.
Michael Kratz, Switzerland. I just wanted to ask you, you showed us some slides where you had deliberately formed an oxide film on the iron particles. And so wouldn't that passivate the reaction? I mean, that changes the whole surface chemistry. So is that positive, or is that an inhibitor, the oxide?
Yeah. Well, this is the reason of the oxide production that's on the surface, is the inhibition of the surface from the oxidation to be able to store the particles for at least a couple of weeks on the air, and also to protect their conglomeration later when we disperse them in water. And the question is, how thick should be this film? Of course, we change the chemistry because we change the surface charge of the particles, which helps for the conglomeration, against the conglomeration. Is it? Yeah, yeah. in the water later, when we disperse them in the water, the film is, let's say, disappear, or it's dissolved, or Thank you.
You mentioned iron. That's very very nice. Are there any other compounds, like metallic compounds, you could use instead of iron?
There were some tests with aluminium. The problem is that iron is the most natural element, so that the production is not so costly. The first thing, that the final product is a normal iron oxide, as I said, of course in aluminium, aluminium oxides, but the only iron has the sort of tendency to be fully oxidized. Otherwise, you get the passivation layer on aluminium, for example, which protects the rest of the aluminium from the oxidation, but you need to fully oxidize the product to have enough electrons for treatment of the contaminants.
If we have no